If there was a surgery that could shrink you into a 5 inches tall man, at the same time your savings will be 1,000 times, would you go for this surgery? The future of the world's population base is huge. Pollution is serious and resources are scarce. So Norwegian scientists invented an operation that would shrink humans. They inject the human being with an agent and push him into an oven-like transformation chamber like popcorn. 2 hours later, tall human is only 5 inches tall. The scientists gathered 36 volunteers for the experiment. Among them were the professor who developed the procedure and his wife. After shrinking, they were placed in a breathable protective enclosure to avoid harm from animals and insects, the non-decomposable waste. Produced by 36 people over for years in the shrunken world is just a bag in the normal world. When 36 volunteers like a garage kid appeared, everyone was shocked. They even gave birth to their first miniature babies after being shrunken. The news spread around the world. Paul saw it and thought it was amazing. But his mother didn't feel the same way. Mom couldn't understand how scientists could shrink people but not cure her back pain. 10 years later, as shrinkage surgery became more common, the government began to lose a lot of money in consumer spending. This also had a huge impact on industries such as construction and automobiles. Shrunken people need less space to live in. They could easily buy a mini house with their savings. Paul is an occupational therapist. He has a great massage technique. He gives his wife, Audrey, frequent massages and takes great care of her. Audrey's dream is to buy a big house, but the two of them are working class. They can't afford to buy a house yet. One day Paul met his good friends at a party. Dave and his girlfriend. Together they became shrunken people. Dave told Paul that the shrinking operation was not about saving the planet, but about saving himself. Their shrunken community had the best houses, the best equipment, and the best doctors. When people shrink, all their expenses are reduced. They don't even have to work as hard. They read books and play music every day. They take cooking and yoga classes. Shrunken people can live happily ever after with their savings. Paul was convinced. His mortgage loan to the bank was rejected. He and Audrey decided to experience the shrinking community. They were completely fascinated by the shrunken life. A full set of diamond jewelry is only $80. Who wouldn't love that? The staff told Mr. and Mrs. Paul their current $150,000 in assets would be equivalent to $12 million. In a downsized community, they could buy a luxury home on a 6,000 square foot estate for a third of that amount. The federal government would also give them a tax exemption. When they heard about the downsizing, they immediately decided to go through with it. After they signed the agreement, the doctors shaved their hair and had their metal teeth pulled out. They were injected with a shrinking solution and taken into the transformation room. After the successful surgery, the people who had filled the beds were so small that the nurses had to shovel them into glass boxes and send them into the shrinking community. All the doctors here are also shrinkers. They reattached Paul's teeth. The nurse even jokingly brought Paul a normal cookie to eat. But just after his surgery was successful, Paul's wife, Audrey, called him. She said the doctors had shaved off her hair and finally started shaving her eyebrows. She was terrified. That's when Audrey realized she had agreed to the reduction surgery just to make Paul happy. It wasn't what Audrey wanted. Paul was devastated. He had the shrink surgery to buy Audrey a big house and became a 5 inches tall shrunken man. But his wife Audrey fled back to the normal world to divorce him. In the future world, Paul in order to buy a wife, a large villa, to actively respond to the call for energy saving and emission reduction shrinkage surgery. But when he became 5 inches tall, Audrey abandoned the operation and fled back to the normal world. Paul looked at this utopian new world. Paul looked at his luxurious villa but could not get interested. Paul watched the courier carry the former wedding ring off the truck and almost shed tears. Paul had to sign the divorce papers on his back and sold the villa for a small apartment. The best way to get over a relationship is to start a new one. Paul soon met a single mother. Paul prepared an elaborate dinner. The shrunken community had nothing but radishes for a side dish. Everything else here is the same as the outside world. Paul even found a rose from the normal world to heighten interest. But he was angry with his neighbors who were having a party upstairs. He opened the balcony and shouted at the bastards upstairs. This led Conrad to his house. Conrad said that neighbors are friends. If you don't like the noise, why don't you come up and play with us? Paul was so angry that he had nothing to say. His date soon came to an end. He kissed his single mother on his way out, but she rejected him. Rejected by one woman after another. He doesn't even want to listen to her explanation and leaves. He goes to Comrade's party with his big rose in his arms. Paul meets the first child born in a shrinking community at the party. He met the captain and all sorts of people. He had a great time and got drunk as hell. He woke up to see a crippled janitor cleaning up. Comrade talks about his philosophy of life and how to make money. People become small in order to get the material life that they can't get in the normal world. He could take the luxuries of the normal world and sell them here in 1/1000th parts. Comrade was talking so eloquently, Paul's eyes were on the lame janitor. He follows the cleaner and finds her stealing the medicine from Comrade's cupboard. Paul recognized her. She was the same Vietnamese stowaway that had been on TV before. Len was a protester of shrinkage surgery. She was forced to shrink in prison and then escaped. Len mistook Paul for a doctor. She said her friend was dying and asked Paul to help her. Paul followed Len on the bus. The bus drove further and further away, as if it was going to leave the neighborhood. Paul realized that there were ghettos in the shrunken world. There are still people who can afford to eat or see a doctor. Len's husband died from a shrink operation. The doctor forgot to pull out his gold teeth. This caused his whole body to explode when he was shrunken. Len's friend came to the shrinking community penniless and with stomach cancer. Paul didn't know what to do but to give her a few painkillers. When Paul came back to visit the next week, Len's friend had died. He helped Len fix her prosthetic leg but accidentally broke it apart. Len's workday was coming up. Paul had to carry Len to clients' homes and clean their homes instead of her. They went to various people's homes to clean. They got a lot of expired food when they were done. Len gave the food to the slum people. Paul was getting close to fitting in. He helped people with their ailments in any way he could. One day Comrade called for cleaning services again. He opened the door to find Paul and Len. Comrade laughed out loud. Comrade took Paul's face and kissed him hard. Comrade had a chance to make a fortune. He was going to Norway to deliver a secret item. He and the captain convinced Paul to go with him. Len said together that she would go too. It turns out she got the world's attention after being forced to shrink. One of the professors who invented the shrinking surgery also wrote to her and apologized to her. He also invited Len to Norway to play, but she was disabled and couldn't afford to go. Now Paul was taking care of her and had a boat. She had no reason not to go. Finally, the four of them set off together to Norway and met the professor. The professor said that due to the Antarctic methane leak, the human race will soon meet the end of the disaster. Both normal people and shrunken people will not escape this disaster. History has never been short of people who predicted the end of the world. But the news was a little hard to accept when it was put in front of them. After a brief moment of depression, Paul and Len quickly decided to live in the present. The next day, the professor took them to a community without a protective shield. They dug a tunnel into the earth's crust and developed farming and animal husbandry in the tunnels to open up the soil for human habitation. All of this would have been impossible to achieve, but because of the shrinking surgery they did, the underground space was fully capable of accommodating humans. Until one day in the future, when the surface environment is back to normal, then everyone can return to the surface. The professor decided to start a plan to migrate underground. Decades ago, he invented the shrinking surgery. Decades later, the next generation of these shrunken people have grown up. The earth is facing a new crisis. The professor asks if they are willing to take another risk with him to save humanity. Paul was deeply moved by the sight of these intrepid residents. He sat on the high mound of dirt and stared. Len said it was time for them to return, but Paul didn't want to go. He wants Len to stay with him and go underground to build a beautiful new world. Len thinks Paul is crazy, but Paul thinks that these are the people they should be helping. Paul thinks he spent his life doing the wrong thing, shrinking his body, losing his wife, breaking Len's prosthetic leg. All of this happened to bring him to the door of this cave and get him to do the right thing. Paul's idea is really unusual. No matter how much Len and Conrad tried to talk him into it, Paul decided to leave them. He danced and played the piano on the grass with the residents and enjoyed the last day of sunshine. Len asked him why he made out with her on the boat that day. Was it because Paul loved her? But Paul changed the subject and asked her what she wanted. Len was instantly disappointed. She felt that Paul had only made out with her because he felt sorry for her. They watched the sun set side by side. Len wrapped her arms around Paul despite her sadness. As they part, Paul tries to kiss Len again, but she refuses. Paul walked away with the Bible Len gave him and wanted to cry more and more. Just as the door was about to close, Paul ran out with his luggage and said he loved Len. It's only when you lose something that you know what you'll miss the most. Paul and Len returned together to the slums of the shrinking community.